The Prime Minister says there's been progress towards a trade deal with the United States, while the President says there is a deal. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer spoke to reporters today about the status of those talks.
We're very happy with where we ended up. We worked together across agencies. I have responsibilities to brief Congress on what documents might look like, speaking with American stakeholders, businesses, unions, etc. We feel confident that we've reached an agreement that will not only continue to protect American workers, American jobs, American supply chains, but really strengthen the North American economy.
Now, details are still being finalized. So what will it take to get it across the finish line? Someone with some insight into how the U.S. administration works is Kellyanne Shaw. She's a former senior White House trade advisor and former deputy assistant to President Trump for international economic affairs. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So listening to USTR Jamieson Greer there, what stood out to you?
I think his optimism, the fact that he was talking about the fact that there's effectively a deal. And I will say, having talked to administration officials today, I got very optimistic vibes. Everyone seems like there could be the trappings of something that will stave off tariffs in the next couple of days, with the caveat that nothing is done until it's done. And so I think while we have all the building blocks in place for what looks like a U.S.-Canada deal, we're still waiting for those final details to be ironed out.
Now, that's the optimism you hear. From your own experience, how likely do you think it is we would see something sewn up, tied up, signed up by the end of Friday?
Yeah, well, I certainly think greater than not. And I've been involved in a lot of negotiations. I've seen the president negotiate with a number of world leaders. I've watched his style closely. I think sort of the drama leading up to this week's announcement of this tariff pause, it really did motivate both sides to give those last minute concessions. And then you need a few more days to paper over what those concessions are. So that's ultimately what we're seeing play out. I think the Canadians really want this to work. I think the U.S. side really wants this to work. They want to see the Canadians not only address some immediate concerns, but also to come back into the fold with these USMCA or CUSMA review negotiations, which really just been the United States and Mexico for almost a year now.
Now, when you say paper over concessions, explain how that works.
Sure. So a lot of these final decisions, especially at the leader level, if you've got President Trump and Prime Minister Carney agreeing to these last minute deals, somebody's got to draft that. There has to be some sort of legal text, understanding, joint fact sheet, something that really ensures that what the two sides agreed to, ultimately both sides are held responsible for. And so that process can often take a bit. And then, of course, there's some last minute horse trading, going back and forth on some of the final provisions. There are open questions about the steel and aluminum and auto tariffs, which are big asks on the Canadian side and the most difficult thing for the U.S. side. And so I think some of those last minute details, as well as frankly just papering over commitments that both sides have in their head, that just takes a little bit of time.
Now, something that stood out to me was that he said documents in plural today. Is it reaching too much to read into that perhaps we're looking at a series of smaller deals as opposed to one big comprehensive deal?
Sure. Well, I think it's a distinction without a difference in many ways. Now, for example, if Canada has agreed to do something on dairy, on alcohol, on autos, and the U.S. has agreed to do something on its side, those might be different documents that are required to put together this package. What I'm expecting is something like an interim deal or a basket of concessions between the United States and Canada, which would then form the basis for the ability to bring Canada back into the larger CUSMA review negotiations. So I think of this as a major first step. I don't think it'll fix every trade issue we have between us, but I do think that it will go a long way in addressing the Canadian retaliation and some of the most pressing issues that the president really cares about to clear the way to deal with some of the other concerns that really should be tackled on a trilateral basis.
Well, that is very interesting that you say that, because from everyone we hear on the Canadian side that the ultimate goal is the CUSMA deal. Not that this isn't important when you're staring 50% tariffs down as a threat, but just how important it is that they reach that goal. And so this was obviously necessary to get there.
Yep, this was absolutely a prerequisite. As I said, we've made more progress in terms of our bilateral trade negotiations in the last 3 or 4 weeks than the United States and Canada made in the past year. I mean, there was really not much happening. And so all of a sudden, you've got some real momentum here. This tariff threat really unstuck this stalemate that we saw between the United States and Canada. And for that reason, I think we may actually land in a place that's much better, where Canada's at the negotiating table and that all three parties will be able to move forward in renegotiating CUSMA, or USMCA as we call it in the United States. But nothing's done until it's done. So I'm waiting with bated breath to see what happens by the end of the week.
Now, I'm sure you saw the president's posting last night, resurrecting with an AI photo of the possibility of resurrecting the Keystone XL pipeline. I'm wondering whether you think, was that perhaps a separate offer made by the Prime Minister to the President in their one-on-one phone call, or do you think that could actually be part of the deal?
So the president doesn't think in silos. Sometimes as trade negotiators, we think the trade stuff is in one lane and the national security stuff or energy stuff is in another. The president thinks about all of this holistically. And so when he's looking at his concerns with Canada, I don't think he limits it to the specific three issues that are at issue under those 338 tariffs. He really wants Canada to address a whole range of things, from immigration to fentanyl to defense to economic security to China. And so all of that is fair game, and anytime you're negotiating with the president. So I think it was probably smart for the prime minister to offer that. The president obviously liked it. He tweeted about it, posted about it. But there is a broader package of concessions that hopefully we'll see by the end of the year, or by the end of the week.
Yeah, it does feel like a year sometimes. Minister Dominic LeBlanc also came out on the steps today of the USTR office, saying that one thing Canada did not give on was supply management in dairy. Now, I mean, that might be in the eye of the beholder in terms of when we see the details. But now, he said this after Jamieson Greer went back into the building. So I'm wondering whether you can give us any insight on how that red line that Canada has held for a while and articulated was received by Greer and his team.
So I spent 10 years negotiating, including with the Canadians, and supply management, I understand, is a very sensitive topic domestically. That said, the president really cares about this. And when he suspended those tariffs, in the proclamation suspending them, he said the Canadians have committed to address dairy. And so I don't know exactly what that will look like. We're all waiting to see the final details, but Canada's going to have to do something, or there's not going to be a deal.
Now, certainly on this side of the border, we've talked a bit about President Trump. Obviously, we've seen him sign deals with other jurisdictions, and then something happens at the last minute, or even after the deal is signed, things change and the terms aren't necessarily respected in the way that the other country feels they were agreed to. Do you think it's in Canada's best interest to sign the deal regardless of fears over whether this is a short-term deal or a long-term deal?
Well, look, I think if you're looking for permanency and 100% certainty, you're not going to get that with this president. I think the president, one of his tactics and styles for negotiation is to always have this little bit of uncertainty to keep our trading partners in compliance with their obligations, to make sure that the other partner is holding up to their end of the bargain. There's always a little bit of that. That's okay, because relationships are dynamic between nation states. They're constantly evolving. Trade flows are constantly changing. I think you need a little bit of flexibility there when you're negotiating. But if Canada wants to get back into the USMCA review process, this is a prerequisite. And I think it's in both countries' interest to really resolve a couple of things up front. It's a good confidence building step. And I think it'll make a much better environment for those negotiations moving forward.
And really quickly, just what are you looking for in the next 72 hours?
I'm waiting to see the details of what gets released, and I'm paying particular attention to the 232s. And I think a lot of our trading partners are. When it comes to steel, aluminum, and automotive, these are things that the president has very rarely given on, and they are the number one asks of Canada. And so I think a lot of folks in Washington, a lot of folks around the country are watching. I'd say the markets are also watching this too, to see, is this the litmus test for how is the U.S.-Canada relationship going to unfold over the next year? Is it going to be successful, or are we going to have a lot more speed bumps? And so this is really the first step in a much broader negotiation.
Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Kellyanne Shaw is a former Trump administration trade advisor.